The galaxy had been quiet for 300 years. Too quiet, some would say, but most beings had grown comfortable with the peace. In the massive crystal towers of Nexus Prime, where the Galactic Council held court over 1,000 worlds, alien delegates gathered in their floating chambers, their conversations carrying a familiar theme. "Have you seen the latest human trade proposals?" chittered Ambassador Clixon, his insect-like mandibles clicking with amusement. The Hive Queen's representative gestured toward a holographic display showing human merchant vessels docking peacefully at various stations. "They're practically begging for better shipping contracts." Chancellor Vextara, her blue-scaled form, shimmering under the chamber's artificial suns, nodded with what passed for a smile among her species. Hard to believe these are the same creatures that once turned the Omega sector into a graveyard of metal and bone. Look at them now. Diplomats, traders, peacekeepers, they've gone soft. The other delegates murmured agreement. The legendary, human warriors who had once carved their names across the galaxy in plasma fire and nuclear fury were now remembered as myths, bedtime stories told to frighten younglings. The humans sitting in the council chambers wore pressed uniforms and spoke of trade agreements and cultural exchanges. Their warships had been converted to hospital vessels and research platforms. The galaxy's apex predators had apparently evolved into something far more civilized. Perhaps, mused the ethereal voice of the Nexus AI, its consciousness flowing through every system on the station, evolution inevitably leads to peace. The humans have simply matured beyond their primitive, violent nature. What none of them knew was that far from the comfort of Nexus Prime, in the cold depths of space where dying stars cast their final light across the void, someone was about to discover that some things never truly die. They just sleep, waiting for the right moment. To wake, Dr. Kim Hana's breath fogged in the recycled air of Research Station Echo 7 as she hunched over her equipment. The station was barely larger than a transport shuttle, its hull scarred by 3 years of exposure to cosmic radiation from the dying star Helios 7. Most xenoarchaeologists wouldn't take an assignment this remote, this dangerous, but Hana had always preferred solitude to the politics of the university. Her fingers danced across the scanner controls, cataloging another batch of artifacts recovered from the ancient battlefield, drifting in Helios 7's gravity well. Broken pieces of ships, melted armor plating, weapons that had been fused into twisted sculptures by unimaginable heat. The debris field was a monument to humanity's darkest hour, the final battle of the Terran hegemony wars where Admiral Park Dae-ho had supposedly died, along with 500,000 others. The scanner hummed quietly, its sensors probing each artifact. For quantum signatures, material composition, historical markers, routine work, peaceful work, the kind of archaeology that filed neat reports and disturbed no one. Then the machine screamed. Hana jerked back as alarms flooded the cramped station with red light. Her equipment had detected something impossible, an active quantum beacon, its signal threading through space like a ghost trying to speak to the living. The transmission was weak, barely registering above background radiation, but it was definitely there. "No way," Hana breathed, her hands flying over the controls. Active signals didn't survive 3 centuries in space. Quantum beacons burned, out after decades at most, their exotic matter cores decaying into harmless particles. Yet here was a transmission, not just surviving, but repeating with mechanical precision every 47 minutes. She isolated the signal, running it through every filter and decoder in her database. The first breakthrough came when she recognized the encryption. Military grade, Terran Defense Force, classified beyond her clearance level. Her hands shook as she applied academic decryption protocols, knowing she was probably breaking a dozen laws. The static cleared, revealing fragments of data that made her blood turn to ice water. Coordinates pointing toward the galactic rim. Battle reports filled with impossible casualty numbers. Tactical assessments describing an enemy that consumes matter and energy, leaving only void, and buried in the deepest layer of encryption. A name that every human child learned in school but hoped never to hear spoken in anger. Admiral Park Dae-ho, the last war god. The man who had ended the hegemony wars by doing things so terrible that the official records were still sealed. the ghost that haunted humanity's transition from conquerors to diplomats. Hana stared at the data streaming across her screens, her rational mind warring with the evidence before her eyes. The quantum signature was authentic, verified by 3 separate analysis protocols. The encryption keys matched archived military databases. The transmission originated from coordinates that shouldn't exist on any star chart. "This can't be right," she whispered to the empty station, but even as she spoke, she was already plotting a course to Terra. Someone needed to know about this. Someone needed to understand what it meant when humanity's greatest monster sent a message from beyond the grave. Outside her tiny window, the dying star Helios 7 pulsed with angry red light, as if it too sensed that something was stirring in the galaxy's quiet depths. Something that had been sleeping for 300 years was finally beginning to wake. The transport shuttle. Moonbeam shuddered as it descended through Terra's atmosphere, its hull glowing cherry red from atmospheric friction. Hana gripped her seat as the craft banked sharply over the sprawling megacity of Neo-Sol, where 50 million people lived in towering arcologies that scraped the clouds. But her destination lay far beneath the city's gleaming surface, in the depths where humanity kept its darkest secrets. The Terra Defense Archives stretched deep into the planet's crust, a maze of reinforced tunnels and climate-controlled vaults that housed 4 centuries of classified material. Hana's academic credentials barely got her past the first checkpoint, but her discovery of an active military beacon opened doors that had been sealed since before her grandmother was born. Security Chief Bei Jung-sik escorted her through corridors, lined with quantum-locked storage units, each one containing enough classified data to topple governments. His augmented eyes glowed softly in the dim lighting as they scanned her biometrics every few seconds, ensuring she hadn't been replaced by some shape-shifting alien infiltrator. "Level 7, he announced as they entered a massive vault filled with holographic displays. Everything related to the Generation ship program. "What exactly are you looking for, Doctor?" Hana pulled up the beacon's quantum signature on her portable scanner. "Cross-reference this transmission source with any ship that launched between 2387 and 2401. Military encryption. Deep space mission profile." The vault's AI hummed to life, its sensors probing through terabytes of archived data. Within seconds, a holographic display materialized, showing the sleek profile of a massive starship, its hull bristling with engines powerful enough to push 50,000 colonists across the galactic void. Generation ship. "New Soul," the AI announced in its emotionless voice. "Launched October 15, 2394. Destination, Kepler 442 system. 53,000 colonists. Full terraforming equipment. Projected arrival date 2798. Ship declared lost after missing scheduled check-in 2401. Hana's heart pounded as she accessed the ship's final transmissions. The early reports were routine. Navigation, updates, colonist health statistics, the mundane details of humanity's greatest adventure. But as she scrolled through the chronological data, the tone began to change. Day 847. Detected unusual gravitational anomalies in target system. Delaying approach for additional surveys. Day 923. Contact with unknown energy signatures. Captain Park Min-jun has ordered defensive posture. Day 967. Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. Something is consuming the outer planets. It's not natural. It's not natural. The final entries made Hana's blood freeze. Desperate battle reports described an enemy that defied comprehension, something that ate matter itself, converting entire worlds into expanding spheres of absolute nothingness. The colonists had fought with every weapon they possessed, but conventional arms were useless against an enemy that could digest energy and matter with equal hunger. The last transmission was barely coherent, transmitted by someone whose voice shook with terror. "To anyone receiving this signal, do not come to Kepler 442. The hunger has found us. It devours everything. Stars, planets, ships, people. There is no defense. Warn Earth. Tell them it's coming. Tell them the darkness between. The stars is alive and it's hungry." Hana sat in stunned silence as the recording ended. 50,000 people, humanity's brightest and bravest, had been consumed by something that shouldn't exist. Something that turned entire solar systems into cosmic graveyards. This is classified at the highest levels, Chief Bay warned her. You understand what happens if this information leaves this room? But Hana was already copying the files to encrypted storage. The galaxy needed to know about this threat, even if it had been silent for 4 centuries. Perhaps especially if it had been silent. The Galactic Council chamber on Nexus Prime buzzed with the usual diplomatic chatter as Hana was granted her emergency hearing. Representatives from dozens of species floated in their environmental pods, their attention divided between her presentation and more pressing matters like trade disputes and territorial negotiations. Chancellor Veltar, of the Altarian Collective, dominated the central platform, his crystalline body refracting the chamber's light into dancing rainbows. When Hana finished her presentation about the new soul and its encounter with the hunger, the alien's laughter rang like wind chimes in a hurricane. Dr. Kim, he said, his voice carrying the patronizing tone reserved for children and academics. Your species' capacity for paranoid delusion never ceases to amaze us. You discover 400-year-old transmissions describing some mythical planet-eater and immediately assume the galaxy faces extinction? The chamber erupted in similar laughter from the assembled delegates. The insectoid swarm queen's representative clicked his mandibles in what passed for amusement among his kind. Humans see monsters in every shadow. It is their nature. Even worse was the reaction from her own species. Ambassador Cho Min-ho, Terra's soft-spoken representative to the council, actually blushed with embarrassment as the alien delegates mocked her findings. Please forgive Dr. Kim's enthusiasm, he said, shooting Hana an apologetic look. Humans have active imaginations. We sometimes let our ancient fears cloud our judgment. Hana felt her face burn with anger and shame, but she pressed on. The quantum signatures are authentic. The tactical data describes engagement patterns consistent with nothing in our recorded history, Chancellor Veltar interrupted. Doctor, in the 3 millennia since we achieved interstellar travel, no species has encountered anything remotely like your hunger. If such a threat existed, surely someone would have detected it by now. The dismissal was complete and humiliating. As Hana gathered her data and prepared to leave, she caught sight of something that made her pause. Buried in the deepest layers of the new soul's final transmission were tactical codes, military frequencies that had been encrypted with methods that shouldn't have existed in 2401. Someone had updated the colony ship's military protocols just before it disappeared. Someone who knew about threats the regular military couldn't imagine. Someone whose tactical genius was so feared that his name was still whispered in the deepest levels of Terra Defense Command. Admiral Park Dae-ho had known about the hunger 4 centuries ago, and if he was still alive, he might be the only person in the galaxy who knew how to fight it. The jump to Serenity's edge took 3 weeks through the most dangerous hyperspace routes in known space. Hana's borrowed transport, the Wandering Star, had to navigate through asteroid fields and unstable wormholes that would have destroyed larger vessels. The monastery world existed in a region where space itself seemed twisted, where ancient gravitational anomalies made navigation a nightmare and communication with the outside galaxy nearly impossible. Captain Lee Dong-woo, a grizzled freighter pilot who'd agreed to take her for twice his usual fee, whistled low as they dropped out of hyperspace. There she is, Doc, the edge of everything. Serenity's edge hung in the void like a blue-green jewel, its surface covered in vast oceans and small continents. No cities marred its landscape, no orbital stations cluttered its space. Just a single landing beacon broadcasting on an ancient frequency, guiding visitors to a small spaceport carved into a mountain face. Why would anyone come here? Hana asked, staring at the planet's isolation. Because some sins are too heavy to carry around civilized folk, Lee replied quietly. This is where the galaxy's ghosts come to die. The spaceport was little more than a landing pad and a small building housing customs and refueling services. The official who processed Hana's entry visa was human, but his eyes held the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen too much and come here to forget. "You're looking for the gardener," he said after checking her credentials. It wasn't a question. "Take the mountain path, follow the blue flowers, and lady, whatever you think you know about him, you don't know enough to be afraid." The path wound through forests of alien trees whose leaves chimed softly in the wind. Hana passed other residents of the monastery world. Humans mostly, but also a few other species who'd apparently found their own reasons to seek isolation. They nodded politely but didn't speak, as if conversation itself was a luxury they'd given up. The gardens appeared suddenly, a vast terraced landscape where earth flowers grew alongside plants from 100 different worlds. Roses bloomed next to Altarian crystal fruit trees. Terran sunflowers towered over beds of Centauri moon lilies. At the center of this impossible garden, a figure knelt beside a pond, tending to water plants with movements that seemed almost ritualistic. Hana had seen holograms of Admiral Park Dae-ho from his military days. A tall, imposing figure in dress uniform, his chest covered with medals that represented victories across a dozen star systems. The man before her bore little resemblance to those images. Age had bent his once straight back and turned his black hair silver. His hands, which had once commanded fleets that could crack planets, now gently coaxed life from the soil. But his eyes were exactly the same, sharp as plasma cutters, missing nothing, analyzing everything. They fixed on Hana the moment she stepped into the garden, and she suddenly understood why enemy admirals had surrendered rather than face him in battle. "Go away, child," Park Dae-ho said without looking up from his flowers. His voice was soft, but carried absolute authority. "The war god is dead, has been for 3 centuries. Admiral, you need to leave." He stood slowly, his movements revealing the careful control of someone managing old injuries. "Whatever crisis brought you here, find another solution. I've retired from the business of death." Hana pulled out her portable scanner and activated the holographic display. "This is the beacon I found. The quantum signature matches the generation ship, New Sol. I think it's a warning about—" "I know what it is." Park Dae-ho's voice cut through her words like a blade. "I told them not to go to Kepler 442. I told them the surveys were incomplete, that there were things in the deep dark that even our sensors couldn't detect. They went anyway. 50,000 souls gone because politicians thought they knew better than soldiers." He finally looked at her scanner and his hands went completely still. The tactical data streams were flowing across the display, showing combat formations and weapon deployments that shouldn't have existed in 2401. Park Dae-ho's weathered face went pale as he recognized patterns in the data. "No," he whispered. "No. We killed them all. Every last one. The Proxima incursion, the Vega massacre, the hell of Barnard's star. We hunted them down and burned them out of every dark corner of the galaxy." "What are you talking about?" Hana demanded. "What are the Devourers?" Park Dae-ho's eyes went distant, seeing battles that had happened long before Hana was born. "They're older than civilization, older than most stars. They exist in the spaces between galaxies, in the cold dark where nothing else can survive. They feed on matter, on energy, on life itself. When they're hungry enough, they move into galaxy-rich regions and consume." He gestured to the tactical display, pointing out formation patterns that looked like nothing Hana had ever seen in military textbooks. "This isn't random. This is coordinated, intelligent. They're not just eating, they're hunting." "But the Council said—" "The Council doesn't know." Park Dae-ho's voice carried the weight of terrible knowledge. "The last Devourer incursion happened 5,000 years ago, before most of the current species achieved spaceflight. Only humans. Remember, and we've spent centuries trying to forget." He stood slowly, and despite his age, despite his bent back and silver hair, something changed in his posture. The gardener disappeared, replaced by something far more dangerous. The man who had earned the title War God through deeds that still made veteran soldiers wake up screaming. "The beacon isn't calling for rescue," Park Dae-ho said grimly. "It's warning us they've returned. The New Sol found them and now they know where we are." Around them, the garden suddenly seemed less peaceful. The alien flowers looked more Like warning signals, their bright colors a reminder that beauty often concealed danger. The wind through the trees sounded like whispered warnings. "How long do we have?" Hana asked. Park Dae-ho studied the tactical data one more time, his strategic mind analyzing invasion patterns and consumption rates. "If they're following the same behavior as last time, they'll test our defenses first. Send scouts to probe," our response. "That gives us maybe months before the main swarm arrives." He looked at her with eyes that had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. "Tell me, child, does the galaxy still think humans have gone soft?" Hana nodded, remembering the laughter in the council chambers. A smile crossed Park Dae-ho's face, cold and sharp as a weapon. "Good. Let them keep thinking that. It will make what comes next much easier." In the distance, a transport ship lifted off from the spaceport, carrying word to the galaxy that humanity's greatest monster was no longer sleeping. The message went out on frequencies that hadn't been used in 300 years, buried deep in civilian communication networks, hidden in shipping manifests and stock market reports, encoded in the background static of entertainment broadcasts. To most beings in the galaxy, it was just noise. But to certain humans scattered across the rim worlds, it was a call they'd been waiting their entire lives to receive. On the mining asteroid Series 7, Lee Jun was inspecting the daily ore shipments when his personal communicator buzzed with an incoming message. The burly foreman glanced around the loading bay, making sure his alien workers weren't watching, then activated the encryption key he'd memorized 30 years ago but never used. 3 words appeared on the tiny screen: "The God wakes." Lee Jun's hands trembled as he read the authentication codes that followed. His supervisor credentials at the mining operation were about to become irrelevant. The old rank insignia hidden in his quarters, Admiral Lee Jun, Terran Defense Reserve, were no longer decoration from a forgotten life. Within an hour, he was broadcasting new orders to the mining ships under his command. Emergency repairs were needed, he told the crews. System upgrades. Routine maintenance that would require the ships to dock at specific coordinates in deep space. The alien overseers grumbled about lost productivity, but Lee Jun had always been reliable. They trusted him. They shouldn't have. Halfway across the galaxy, freighter Captain Song Hee-jin received her own coded message while hauling grain to the Proxima colonies. Her crew, all humans she'd handpicked over the years, watched as she sealed the cargo bay and initiated a sequence of commands that shouldn't have existed on a civilian transport. The grain containers split open like flowers, revealing rows of plasma torpedoes and missile pods. The freighter's innocent hull plating retracted to expose military-grade armor and weapon mounts. Within minutes, the peaceful trader had become something far more dangerous, a wolf that had been dressed as a sheep for decades. "Captain, First Officer Kim Tae-sung said quietly, "The weapon systems are fully operational. All hands are reporting ready." Song Hye-jin smiled grimly as she changed course toward the rendezvous coordinates. "Signal all reserve units in this sector. Tell them the waiting is over." The transformation was happening everywhere. In the Vega system, a research station suddenly bristled with sensor arrays powerful enough to track ships across multiple star systems. On New Busan, a shipyard that had been building cargo haulers for 2 centuries began welding gun turrets onto their hulls instead. Hundreds of humans who had spent their lives as merchants, miners, and mechanics were remembering their other profession. They were soldiers. They had always been soldiers. The Galactic Council's first hint that something was wrong came when their monitoring stations in the Outer Rim began reporting anomalies. Not the kind they'd been seeing lately. Entire systems vanishing without explanation, but something else. Ships were moving. Lots of ships. Human ships that weren't supposed to exist. Impossible, Chancellor Veltar declared as he studied the tactical displays in the Council's war room. The humans decommissioned their military fleets centuries ago. These readings must be sensor ghosts. But the readings kept coming. From 36 star systems, reports flooded in of human vessels appearing seemingly from nowhere. Ships that looked like freighters but moved like destroyers. Mining barges that suddenly deployed fighter squadrons. The humans hadn't abandoned their military capabilities. They'd hidden them in plain sight. Then the real horror began. The first system to go dark was Kepler 186, a small colony world with 2 million inhabitants. The automated beacons simply stopped transmitting. Search and rescue ships found empty space where a thriving world had been. No debris, no radiation, no trace that anything had ever existed there. Kepler 442 followed 2 days later. Then Wolf 359. Each time the pattern was the same, a complete absence where busy star systems had once flourished, not destroyed but consumed, eaten by something that left nothing behind. By the end of the first week, 7 systems had vanished. By the end of the second, the number had climbed to 15. Panic spread through the galactic community as refugees from the rim worlds brought stories of darkness moving between the stars, of something vast and hungry approaching from the empty spaces between galaxies. Chancellor Veltar's crystalline features had lost their usual prismatic shine when he finally swallowed his pride and ordered his personal dreadnought to make the journey to Serenity's edge. The diplomatic convoy that accompanied him included representatives from every major species in the galaxy, the same beings who had laughed at Dr. Kim Hana's warnings just weeks before. The monastery world looked exactly the same as always, peaceful and isolated. But Veltar's sensors detected something that made his pilot's hands shake on the controls. Energy signatures, massive ones. Hidden in the system's asteroid field and gas giant shadows were ships, human warships that shouldn't have existed. They landed at the simple spaceport, and Veltar led his delegation up the mountain path to the gardens where Park Daeho tended his flowers. The old human was exactly where they'd expected to find him, kneeling beside his pond, caring for alien plants with infinite patience. "Admiral," Veltar began, his usual arrogance replaced by barely controlled desperation. We may have been hasty in our dismissal of your warnings. The Altarian Collective formally requests. You had your chance for prevention," Park Daeho interrupted without looking up from his flowers. His voice was cold as the void between stars. "Now you get survival, if you earn it." The alien delegation shifted nervously as the old human slowly stood. There was something different about him now, something that made their instincts scream warnings about apex predators and ancient dangers. "Admiral, surely we can discuss." Veltar tried again. His words died as the sky above them darkened. A massive shadow fell across the garden as something enormous decloaked directly overhead. The indomitable Admiral Park Daeho's flagship, from the Hegemony Wars, thought destroyed 3 centuries ago, hung in the air like a floating mountain of armor and weapons. The dreadnought was over 2 kilometers long, its hull scarred by battles that had shaped the galaxy's history. Gun batteries that could crack moons tracked the diplomatic ships like predators eyeing prey. Launch bays big enough to hold cruiser squadrons yawned open like hungry mouths. The alien delegates stumbled backward in instinctive terror as they realized what they were seeing. This wasn't just a warship, it was a legend made real. The vessel that had ended the siege of Terra Prime, the ship that had burned the Hegemony's capital fleet to atoms in a single engagement. "How?" Veltar whispered. Park Daeho finally looked at him, and the alien chancellor saw something in those ancient eyes that made him wish he'd never left the safety of Nexus Prime. "Did you really think," the war god asked quietly, "that we'd forgotten how to fight?" Above them, more ships began to decloak, dozens of them, hundreds. The hidden reserve fleet that humanity had maintained in secret for 3 centuries, waiting for the day when the galaxy would need its monsters again. That day had finally come. The human fleet gathered at the edge of known space looked like a museum of forgotten nightmares. Ships that had been declared destroyed centuries ago floated in perfect formation, alongside vessels that had been disguised as civilian craft for generations. The Indomitable commanded the center, its massive bulk dwarfing even the heaviest dreadnoughts from other species. Dr. Kim Hana stood on the flagship's bridge, watching the tactical displays with growing horror. The enemy wasn't coming as ships or fleets, they were coming as pure absence, regions of space where matter itself simply ceased to exist. The devourers moved through the void like holes in reality, consuming everything they touched and growing larger with each meal. Contact in 30 minutes, reported Captain Yoon Tae-min from his station. The veteran officer's voice was steady, but Hana could see the fear in his eyes. This wasn't like the wars humans had fought before. There would be no prisoners, no negotiations, no mercy, only survival or extinction. Admiral Park Dae-ho stood at the center of the bridge, his aged frame somehow radiating the same authority he'd possessed in his prime. Around him, holographic displays showed the approaching swarm, thousands of dark voids moving in perfect coordination, each one the size of a small moon. All ships, this is Admiral Park. His voice echoed across every human vessel in the fleet. Remember why we fight. Not for glory, not for conquest. For the children sleeping safely in their beds. For the futures we'll never see. The response came from 500 captains across the fleet. For humanity, Admiral. For home. The first contact was almost gentle. A scout devourer, no larger than a fighter craft, drifted toward the human formation. It looked like a sphere of absolute darkness so black that it hurt to look at directly. When it touched the outer edge of a patrol ship's shields, both the energy barrier and the vessel simply vanished. No explosion, no debris, just empty space where the brave explorer had been moments before. All units, weapons free, Park Dae-ho commanded. Execute Pattern Omega-7. The human fleet erupted in coordinated fury. Plasma cannons and missile batteries opened fire, filling space with enough destructive energy to crack planets. But the weapons passed through the devourers, like light through shadows. Conventional matter simply didn't affect them. Sir, weapons are ineffective, Captain Yoon reported. The enemy is advancing on all fronts. Park Dae-ho studied the tactical display with the cold calculation that had made him legendary. The devourers were moving in a pattern he recognized, not random feeding but coordinated hunting behavior. They were trying to surround the human fleet, cut off escape routes, and consume everything in one massive feast. They're using pack tactics, he murmured, just like on Proxima Centauri. Lee Jun, take Squadron 7 and harass their left flank. Song Hae-jin, your raiders hit their scouts. Make them think we're panicking. The veteran commanders acknowledged their orders and began executing maneuvers that looked desperate but were anything but. Ships broke formation, fleeing in apparent panic while laying complex sensor mines. Others engaged in running battles that drew the devourers toward specific coordinates. Meanwhile, Park Dae-ho was orchestrating something far more dangerous. DEPA, in the Indomitable's engineering section, Chief Engineer Bae Min-jun was following orders that violated every safety protocol in the book. The ship's quantum cores were being deliberately destabilized, their exotic matter containment systems pushed beyond their design limits. Admiral, Dr. Hana said urgently, the engineering reports show you're preparing to do what's necessary, Park Dae-ho interrupted. The devourers consume matter and energy, but they can't consume the fundamental forces that hold the universe together. Not when those forces are released all at once. The battle was reaching its climax. More human ships were disappearing as the devourers closed in, but Park Dae-ho's tactics were working. The enemy was following predicted patterns, moving into the gravitational well of the system's dying star, the same star that was about to become the galaxy's salvation. All remaining ships, retreat to minimum safe distance, Park Dae-ho ordered. Execute immediately. Sir, what about the Indomitable? Captain Yoon asked. Park Dae-ho looked at his old friend with a sad smile. We stay. Someone has to make sure they all follow us into the star. The Indomitable dove toward the system's red giant, its engines screaming at maximum power. Behind it came the entire devourer swarm, drawn by the largest concentration of matter in the fleet. They sensed an easy meal, a massive warship trapped in a gravity well, unable to escape. They were wrong. Engineering, status report, Park Dae-ho called out. Quantum cores at critical instability, Admiral, Bae Min-jun replied. We're past the point of no return. On the bridge's main screen, the surface of the dying star filled their view. Solar flares larger than planets danced across its surface, and the temperature readings were climbing beyond the scale of their instruments. Park, Daeho opened a final channel to Dr. Hana, who had been evacuated to one of the fleeing vessels. "Tell them," he said quietly, "that humanity's strength was never our weapons. It was our willingness to become the monster, so others don't have to." The Indomitable plunged into the star's chromosphere, with the entire Devourer swarm following. Close behind, for a moment the ancient predators tried to consume the star's plasma, but they had made a fatal mistake. They had followed their prey into a trap that even their hunger couldn't escape. Park Daeho's final order was simple. "Now, Chief." The Indomitable's quantum cores destabilized simultaneously, releasing exotic matter reactions that tore holes in space-time itself. The dying star, already unstable, couldn't contain the additional energy. Its core collapsed and then exploded outward in a supernova that could be seen from 50 light-years away. The Devourers, caught in the heart of the explosion, were consumed by forces even they couldn't digest. The fundamental particles of their being were scattered across interstellar space, their ancient hunger finally silenced. In the aftermath, rescue ships found only empty space where the battle had been fought. The Indomitable was gone. Admiral Park Daeho was gone. But so were the Devourers, all of them, erased from existence by a man who had been willing to become the very thing he'd spent his life fighting. The galaxy mourned its unlikely savior with parades and monuments, but the humans who had served under him knew the truth. Park Daeho hadn't died a hero's death. He'd died as he'd lived, as a weapon pointed at humanity's enemies, willing to pay any price to keep his people safe. Chancellor Veltar, speaking at the memorial service on Nexus Prime, finally understood what he'd failed to grasp before. "We thought humans had evolved beyond violence. We were wrong. They had simply learned to save their violence for when it mattered most." The galaxy was safe. The children could sleep peacefully in their beds. And somewhere in the quantum foam of collapsed space-time, the war god had finally found his rest. Jend.